Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well and in very good spirits wherever you are in the world. And today, if you don't mind, I would very much like to continue on with our journey, our discussions, our discoveries, and our explorations with respect to the recent releases made by the Criterion Collection during this year of 2023. And that brings us to that title, which has been designated by Criterion at spine number 1169. And this is a title which is described as being from the year 2020. And the name of the filmmaker is Lemohang Jeremiah Mosese. And the name of the film is This Is Not a Burial, It's a Resurrection. This is the work from the year 2020, and it is written by, edited by, and directed by Lemohang Jeremiah Mosese. And it has a really compelling cast, at the head of which is Mary Twala Malongo as the character of Mantua in this work, which is my first time watching this film on the occasion of this Criterion release. And my goodness, what a powerful poetic work this is on so many levels, and I'll try to explain why I feel this way about this work, which is This Is Not a Burial, It's a Resurrection. So if we were to try to focus in on the story or plot structure of this film, I think I mentioned the character of Mantua, and this is, in a sense, her story from a very intimate portrayal or setting with regard to her feelings of, say, love and devotion towards certain members of her family, her close-knit circle on the one hand, and also how she is very utterly and quite emotionally affected and devastated by certain aspects of loss and death that are confronting her very early on in the film. And we get a sense of this through the lyrical passages of Mosese's camera work and design and story structure, which tells a very visual, arresting tale that is also filled with a lot of deep emotional resonances, as well as echoes of certain, say, cultural, contextual points, as well as being stories about, and main story and supplementary stories about human beings and the lives that we meet as we venture through the engagement of this film, with Mantua at the very heart and soul of this film. And I mentioned this idea of loss and dealing with a sense of, say, devastation. And that dealing with a sense of devastation, I think, carries with it various levels of presentation in this film, both in terms of, in one way, we see her early on in very almost ethereal senses how fleeting and how delicate life is in the context of Mantua's own story. And also we get a sense, too, of the delicacy and the timidity and the almost the impermanence of things when we see various exterior forces at play, both in terms of a commercial or capitalistic impulse that is externalized, and also how that is very much part of the political terrain that is part and parcel of the story and the story arc and the cultural and societal cultural setting that we find when we watch this film in the context of Lesotho, in the context of South Africa, in the context of the relationships between political and cultural relationships. But always at the heart of this, at the very heart of this, we have the very landscape of the human soul as portrayed by this character of Mantua in the form of this really powerful and quite vivid and a very emotionally astounding performance of Mary Twala Malongo. We see her visage, her face, and we hear the sound of her voice, her expression, whether that expression be in the form of a type of call or song, And that type of call or song can be in the form of happiness, it can be in the form of sadness, it can be in the form of deep, penetrative, contemplative thought, or it can be in the form of truly exuberant and almost a type of impulsive sense of happiness and joy, or somewhere between, or different various forces of, say, expressions of human emotion. This is in the sound of her voice, also in the way that she glances. She gives looks of, say, consternation, or looks of say, dedication and devotion, or a sense of bewilderment and confusion and disgust, but also a sense of being alive and being in the moment, in the now, especially when she is confronting various obstacles that we see her trying to confront, whether that be in the form of, say, various deep connections that are either broken or hindered or damaged, or they may be in the form of externalized forces that are at play trying to usurp or otherwise take advantage of various situations in which she is directly involved. That also involves a sense of the rural country, the rural life versus a more urban setting, and that contrast is, I think, further exacerbated by the nature of the bureaucratic daily routines that also potentially form a sense of, say, obstacle or hindrance with Mantua's story. Also, in the context of this struggle and the sense of maybe almost a metaphorical albatross, we also get the truly rugged and very strong and quite powerful sense of, say, the emotional depth and the dedication and devotion with which Mantua really asserts herself and forms a sense of type of a resistance power, and also a sense of a inward or interior power or drive that really pushes her forward and really brings her to the fore and really calls her on to sort of fight on in very direct ways, or also in very indirect ways. In other words, this is her story in terms of her struggle. This is also her story in terms of her sense of resistance, and that's also her story in a sense of triumph. And how she triumphs and how she overcomes these various obstacles is one of the key points of drama that make this film, I think, very, very accessible and very universal. One that, as I watched it for the first time upon this Criterion release, I was immediately absorbed. And again, at the heart and center of this film can be said to be this beautifully rendered characterization and a representation of this wonderfully alive human being, that is Mantua, in the Merituala Longo performance. It is an extraordinary, astounding performance. I mentioned the voice as well. There's also the way in which the face and the visage shows so many years of human life having lived its worth and then some. And now it's being asked, and her soul is being asked for yet more courage and yet more resilience. And whether she's able to fathom this courage and resilience is a part of the, I think, charm and allure of this film. This is not a burial, it's a resurrection. But there's so much that's read into the face. And I think as part of the supplements of this great Criterion release, there's a commentary track. And in the commentary track, there is Lemohang Jeremiah Mosese's commentary, and also that of producer Kate Punsfer, where they talk about, among many things, the importance of the face and the visage, and how it was an attempt or an endeavor of the filmmakers to show the landscape of the soul as exemplified or represented by the face, and how much the film was trying to capture the landscape of the environment, but also the landscape of the face. And that is so important. That is really important. And to bring alive the true courage of this character and this performance, it comes through so directly and so honestly in this pure and powerful way through this and other parts of this magnificent performance. I mean, this is a very, very compelling film indeed. And what I like too is, as I mentioned before, there are ways in which this film tells a story or tells certain stories of a place and say situations that maybe I'm not necessarily directly familiar with because I'm not from this part of the world necessarily. That being said, I found the film to be so arresting and so immediately engaging because it brought me these details and brought me these details in a way that was, I think, very understandable. There was a way in which Mosese's language, cinema language, says things but doesn't say things at the same time, and I mean that very complimentarily. For example, it presents information through a type of visual poetic language, and a shot is rendered, but that shot is filled with a lot of meaning. And sometimes there are words accompanying that meaningful shot. Otherwise, the shot is maybe rendered without dialogue. But despite the fact that certain shots are rendered without dialogue, or certain scenarios or scenes are rendered without dialogue, that still provides enough information for us, the viewer, to be able to understand something of what's going on, say through the passage of a close-up and a movement of the character of the camera up to the sky and then back down with the subliminal edit that accompanies the movement. We understand that the passage of time has occurred and also the passage of life and death has occurred within the space of, say, a few moments of cinema time, yet the passage of actual human lived time is immense. And so that type of depth of poetic, prowess, I think, is on display. That being one example. It happens early on in the film, and it happens throughout the film. In this way, this magical way in which Mosese is able to capture the poetic, lyrical quality of a contemplative camera and a contemplative camera eye that also captures the beauty of the landscape and also captures the breathtaking detail of the environment while always keeping an eye on the intimate nature of the human characters that are at the heart and soul of this film. So we never lose sight of the importance and urgency of that human story. We are, of course, in a world or in a sense or in sensibilities or in cultural contexts that, of course, there are many details of that cultural context that emerge, I think, also in very loving detail. At the same time, there is a universality that is at play here that makes for very, very arresting and compelling watch indeed, and a very emotionally overwhelming way in which this film is punctuated. I think that gives a further sense of a type of direct engagement between the viewer and the film itself. I mean, it is a really remarkable achievement indeed. And then also I should mention too the other elements of the film that make for very arresting filmmaking. For instance, I mentioned the very contemplative movement of camera, the way that color blends into a sense of the portrait nature of certain shots, and that portrait nature also has a depth of soul by means of the brilliance of the performances. There's also a way too that the film gives a sense of reality, but the sense of reality, I would say, is not in a type of cinema verite or docudrama type of fashion. On the contrary, the film, I think, very much is heightened reality, or there is a way in which, say, certain shots are very purposely poetic shots, or certain angles are very lyrically placed angles, or even the application of music is very much, I think, trying to show us a sense of a real, the application of cinema to portray something of the human soul. And so that application of cinema can be very heightened, and it can be very dramatic, and can call attention to itself. But I think it does so with such great effect and such great sense of care and design that it becomes a very hypnotic experience, and it's very, I think, emphatically cinematic, and I think proudly cinematic in that way. This work, this is not a burial; it's a resurrection. It is very proudly and emphatically cinematic. And it's loudly and I think very justifiably proclaiming its own cinematic, emphatic nature by giving us the story that is very dramatic and also very moving and the details and the quiet details give way to a sense of giving room for these human characters to live and breathe, and for us to be able to inhabit that world with these characters as we feel their pain, as we feel their joy, and indeed as we feel the rush of triumph and also the devastating nature of defeat, and every single step in between. We feel it, and the application, as I say, of the cinematic, triumphant nature of the expressions in Mosese's hands, I think, gives a really powerful engagement indeed in cinema. So as I say, this was a film that I had not seen prior to this release, and so after I saw it, I was mesmerized, and I was very, very taken with the story, and I was very taken with the movements of the story and the rhythms, guided along by many of the cinematic elements in director Mosese's hands, and of course by the dynamic performance of the lead character. It was a truly amazing work indeed, and I watched it a number of times, in fact, for purposes of trying to absorb all the details and trying to get a sense of the time and place, while also getting a grip on sort of my own feelings and sense of this. It has this way, as I say, of a type of universality, because it also has the ability of reminding the viewer, reminding me of various points of my own, say, family life. While I would certainly admit that maybe my own, say, personal details do not directly mirror the details of the plot of This Is Not a Burial, It's a Resurrection, I can say that it does jog the memory. It's a film that really inspires and provokes and gives rise to thought and feelings and memories stirred up in one's own heart. Because of the familial dynamics that are at play here, because of the sense of loss and joy that I think are very much supremely universal and are expressed in such vivid and real detail, like we have in this film, This Is Not a Burial, It's a Resurrection, and then some. So it is a remarkable achievement indeed. I'm so happy to have been able to watch this through the great Criterion release, which is on the table. And it is this film, again, from the year 2020, from the filmmaker Lemohang Jeremiah Mosese, and it is This Is Not a Burial, It's a Resurrection. The Criterion Collection has released this film, This Is Not a Burial, It's a Resurrection, again at spine number 1169, and this is a Blu-ray edition, and it's a Blu-ray edition which is purported to be based on a 2K digital master approved by director Lemohang Jeremiah Mosese with 5.1 surround DTS HD master audio soundtrack. And so, as I said, I haven't seen this film prior to the Criterion release, so I can't say that I have any detailed expertise when it comes to the presentation details, the soundtrack details, or the visual details as aspects of the presentation. And also it is a relatively speaking recent release. The year is 2020. And so given those limitations that I have, I can say that I was very much overwhelmed in a positive way by how it looked and sounded and felt. It is a film that I think is very rich in detail. It is a film that is very much, it is a audio-visual experience. It is a film that in many ways is, it's a film that relies on the audio-visual experience of the cinematic poetry. And so that way it becomes a very interactive viewing experience in a certain manner of speaking. And so in order to be able to have that heightened experience, I think the presentation needs to be very sound and crisp in terms of the visual presentation and the audio presentation. I found it to be very, very crisp and sound and arresting indeed. For example, the music I mentioned too. The music is a very kind of key point. It has almost a modernistic pulse to it in a manner of speaking. So I should mention here the music is by Yu Miyashita, and so that type of almost arresting detail, almost enveloping nature of the soundtrack, I think really helps and adds to the enhancement of the effect of the viewing experience and nature of this. So I was very, very taken by the look and sound of this as I was watching it again a number of times. And it was, again, a very visually arresting tale. And the way it's presented here by this Criterion release, to my eyes and my ears, I found to be very, very pleasing indeed. Now, if we can move on to the supplements that can be found with this Criterion release. There are a number of supplements here, and the first up is a commentary track. And this is a commentary track which is described as being from the year 2022. So that's a new commentary track by my count. And this is with the producer, Kate Pensifer, and also the writer, the editor, and director, Lemohang Jeremiah Mosese. And so the two of them are talking here in this very casual chat and discussion. And this is also my occasion, the first occasion to hear from the artists themselves, from the producer and also director. So I found the conversation, I found the tones of voices of these two talking together, and they have a very, I think, very close and casual rapport, which is so lovely to hear. It's so pleasing to the ear, and just the way that they have this calm nature, and they're expressing various aspects of the film and the film vocabulary and anecdotes surrounding the background of the film. There is in no way any type of pretense, or there's in no way a sense of a type of arrogance in their the way they're talking. On the contrary, my dear friends, the two of them here are speaking with such modesty and such kindness, and also a sense of calm and almost a very contemplative delivery. I was so impressed and enamored by their conversation. Just listening to their voices, I thought was so soothing and so calming. I was very taken with this, and of course, not to mention too what they were speaking of. Mosese, for instance, speaks about a type of poetic approach to his cinema, and also certain details emerge with regard to the background and various shots of the sky and the mountain scenery that is part of the overall aesthetic landscape of the film. But also at the same time, the two of them were trying to really emphasize just how much they wanted to resist certain quote-unquote expectations of African cinema. They wanted to resist that type of, say, they wanted to resist certain expectations in favor of the heart and soul of the story that they were trying to tell here. And again, at the heart and center of that is the brilliant performance by Maritwala Malongo, and they speak in such glowing terms, very reverential terms, about the legendary status of this actor and performer. Very, very legendary indeed. And so to hear their excitement about working with her, and to get the sense of the initial concept of the story by Mosese on the one hand, versus how he ended up crafting the film based on her performance and the performances of others on the other hand. This is, again, a really great example of the creative process at play, as well as how things work out in the end with such magnificent success, as you can see in the end result of the film. And so, and to hear the two of them and their excitement about working with this cast, it's so lovely, it's so endearing, it's really wonderful. And there are also some details too that emerge. I like how the producer mentions how Mosese is a very modest individual, and so Mosese, I remember at the beginning, he introduced himself as the director, but he doesn't mention that he edited the film as well. That's where the producer Kate Pensifer mentions it. Don't forget, he also edits the film as well. So I like how she is also looking out for his best interests, in a manner of speaking, to try to convey to us, the viewers and the listeners, especially those who are being introduced to the world and the art of Mosese for the first time, such as myself, to convey to us just how much of a well-rounded artist he is, and what a great sense of a type of collaboration, artistic collaboration, that the two of them evidently have in the course of their conversation here. And they do speak too about how they met and what it was that artistically inspired the two of them to want to work together to create this work. This is not a burial, it's a resurrection. So, and also there's discussion too a little bit about the meaning of the title. Without going into too much detail, I think there is a sense of a type of spiritual dynamic of the film. There's also a sense of death and resurrection in the film. There's also a sense of the cycle of life in the film. I think that's embodied very well in this very poetically realized title, that is, this is not a burial, it's a resurrection. And also this aspect too that I pointed out a little bit earlier, which is the landscape of faces, this idea of the iconic nature of the performance. There's a type of a cultural dynamic and political dynamic as well that is very subtly overlaid into the plot, but not overly emphasized. But it's still very key to the specific plot mechanics going forward. So there's also some interesting moments about working with on location, working with certain, say, set dynamics, working with other members of the cast, ideas about how music was used, ideas about how certain aspects of narration and musical instruments were used, how the human voice is used, etc. And so these aspects and more, I think, are so wonderfully discussed, so lovingly discussed, and discussed in such a soothing and soothing way that's so beautiful to listen to. The conversation between these two on the commentary track. It is a great commentary track, so please check it out if you can. I've mentioned before how sometimes you get Criterion releases, especially of late, where you don't get commentary tracks at all, or sometimes you might get maybe Criterion isn't necessarily making quote-unquote new commentary tracks. Well, here, my dear friends, is an example where we're getting a new commentary track. It's over the course of the entire film, and it is great. This is great. This is the reason why, or this is a great example as to why commentary tracks are so great and so valuable. You get a sense of the filmmaking. You also get a sense of the filmmakers and the types of people that they are, and their sensibilities and their own, say, character makeup. And so you just listen to the first couple seconds of their voices and their talking, and you're hooked. Believe me, it's so great. So this is the commentary track that accompanies this film. Please check it out if you can. So next, let's talk about the other supplements that can be found accompanying this Blu-ray release of the film This Is Not a Burial, It's a Resurrection. And so what we have next is a number of short films or a number of other works by Mosese. But before that, we have what's called an introduction to the films themselves. And so this is the first supplement, the intro to the films. This is approximately 14 minutes. And this is from the year 2022. And this is a discussion with Lemohang Jeremiah Mosese. And this is great too. Again, another great introduction, another great primer into the career of Mosese leading up to This Is Not a Burial, It's a Resurrection. And he speaks here about the earlier works that are going to follow in the supplements. So this is Mother, I Am Suffocating. This is My Last Film About You. From 2019, and then Behemoth, or The Game of God, from 2016, and then Mosongoa from 2014, as well as other aspects of filmmaking and the cinematic philosophy and the importance of literature and poetry and art with Mosese's own aesthetic, as well as some biographical details about Mosese and his life and childhood, and also how he experienced cinema from a fairly early age, etc. So, the importance of Lesotho, and also the importance of his cinematic philosophical underpinnings with regard to how he regards or handles or considers aspects of, say, colonialism, and also a sense of morality, and also a sense of a cultural consciousness, and also this idea too of the broad brushstrokes of human endeavor and movement and society and culture. An example like migration patterns, etc., movements of people to and from various places, and how people and places can be affected. And we actually get a sense of this, I think, very much so, directly in a film, This Is Not a Burial, It's a Resurrection. And then this type of what is referred to in this discussion here as a quote-unquote refugee spirit. This idea of the mobility or movement of human dynamics, and how that has a sense of emotional or spiritual consciousness associated with it, and other aspects. So this discussion, or this introduction, I think serves a great introduction into the short works that we're about to see in the supplements, as well as an introduction into the world and mind and philosophy of Mosese himself. So in that regard, this was very illuminating and eye-opening. for me, again, I'm being introduced to the world of Mosese. So this is a great introduction and a great place to go indeed. I should point out just a number of things here, or just one thing. There is a picture, or there's a moment where Mosese is talking about some of the early films that he was watching growing up, and one of the films that's referenced here is the Castellari work, which is called 1990 Bronx Warriors. And so I think the Criterion Collection, this supplement, tries to then supplement that discussion by showing a picture from such film that's named here. And I think it's a very common thing that occurs in these making of supplements or interview supplements, to show a picture or still from a film that's being discussed. So that, I think, it's not controversial at all. But I should point out there, I think there's a little bit of it seems to me a little bit of a mistake. I think there's a still that's shown by the people that made this supplement where the film that was being discussed was 1990 Bronx Warriors, but in fact the still that was used, I think, was a still from the wrong film. I think the still that was mistakenly used was from the Walter Hill film, which is called The Warriors. And so I think they weren't necessarily talking about the Warriors at that time, but the supplement showed a still of the film The Warriors. So it's just a very minor mistake. I mean, if I'm not mistaken, that it's a little bit of an error indeed. But errors happen, mistakes happen. So and it goes by very quickly. But the point, of course, is that Mosese did have certain cinematic influences growing up and exposure to cinema growing up, and that also informed a lot of what he is endeavoring to do in the context of this and other works. So it's great to have this conversation, this discussion with Mosese. To give some background into this work. This is not a burial, it's a resurrection. And also some background into the films that we are about to see. And those films are, once again, Mother, I Am Suffocating. This is my last film about you, from 2019. This is approximately an hour and 16 minutes. And then Behemoth, or The Game of God, from 2016, approximately 12 minutes. And then, last but not least, Mosongoa, 2014, approximately 22 minutes. Mosongoa here is also labeled or subtitled The Mocked One. So just going in order here, Mother, I'm Suffocating, this is my last film about you. This has such a, I think, this has a type of episodic, maybe not episodic, I take that back. It has a very poetic nature to it and style. It has this way of directly confronting us with direct close-up shots of faces and images and shots of, say, human bodies. And also it's done in a way that is very poetical and lyrical. And there's this sort of metaphorical image of the albatross, or the burden, or the struggle, or the journey. That is, I think, expressed as a type of through-line metaphor. And I think is so wonderfully rendered. And it also has echoes, too, of this type of struggle or albatross or journey that we see in the story. This is not a burial, it's a resurrection. So, and the stylings are really quite vivid and similar. So it's a very compelling work indeed. Mother, I Am Suffocating, this is my last film about you, from 2019. And then following that is Behemoth, or The Game of God, from 2016. Also here we have a sense of religion or spiritualism, and also a type of approach to it in the form of say, speech and pastor approach and the like. Also, there's a sense or the metaphorical image of the burden or the journey or the albatross and the carrying of something, or the burden and the heaviness of carrying something. And that's also indicative of life and death, the nature of life and death, images of coffins and the like, and religion and spirituality enveloped in this film, Behemoth, or The Game of God. And that too has its links very, very potently with the film, like This Is Not a Burial, It's a Resurrection. And indeed, the other film that accompanied the supplements, Mother, I'm Suffocating, This Is My Last Film About You. So really great, again, so compelling, and there's a cinematic envelopment that happens that's very welcoming and also very compelling. So that's great stuff. And then the 2014 work, Mosongoa, 22 minutes. I apologize for my poor pronunciation, by the way. This is described as being, it's a story also of certain rural life aspects, and also there is a sense of a type of competition. It's referred to as stick fighting, but also in this story, or in this type of, say, contemplative reflection, there is a way in which we get a sense of the society, sense of the culture, through images and through feelings and atmospheres. And also we get a sense of urgency and a sense of directness, while also getting a sense of the beauty and the philosophy. And again, very much a sense of Mosese as a filmmaker and artist. So this is Mosongoa, approximately 22 minutes. And then the supplements actually round themselves out with the inclusion of a trailer, so that's also worth checking out. But we have these 3 short films, plus the introduction, plus the film itself. This is not a burial; it's a resurrection. So, and then the commentary track. So, from my perspective, this is a very great introduction into the world of Mosese. Relatively speaking, Mosese could be said to be a newly emerging, or an artist that has newly emerged, not emerging, but has emerged very emphatically and triumphantly so. And so this Criterion release, I think, gives a sense of guidance as to the works of Mosese up to This Is Not a Burial, It's a Resurrection. And for my money, it gives such a great and detailed account of who this artist is and what this artist has done up to now. And it's very exciting indeed, very thought-provoking indeed, and very artistically vibrant indeed. And it gives rise to excitement as to what's to come. So this is a great introduction into the world of Mosese. This is a great introduction into the sensibilities of the stories that he's telling in the context of in the context of these characters that we meet, in the context of this part of the world that we are engaged with, and the like. So I am very, very happy about this indeed. And especially too with the commentary track. That's really great. Would it have been nice if there were more discussions, more, say, academic discussions with scholars of Mosese's work? Of course, that would have been really great. But I think there, in an interesting way, the supplements themselves, I think they show rather than tell. I don't know if that makes any sense, and that show rather than tell aspect of the supplements, I think, is a really lovely mirror and reflection of the show rather than tell artistic regard of Mosese's works themselves. So, in an interesting way, the way in which the supplements provide emphasis on the short films is a way for the supplements to indeed mirror the cinematic philosophy of Mosese, which can be described, I think, in a very complementary way as show, not tell, to show and to evoke and to suggest, type through atmosphere and feelings and visions and visual landscape shots and shots of faces and looks and glances and the music, the type of feeling and rumor that emerges in the heart as one watches it. I think that's an interesting parallel. So in any event, that's my way of trying to emphasize just how much I was really taken with these supplements, and I found them to be very fascinating. And again, also the commentary track. I'm a big fan of commentary tracks, and so to get a new one here is great, great news indeed. So that's my 2 cents when it comes to the supplements that accompany This Is Not a Burial, It's a Resurrection. And next I want to talk about the leaflet and also certain presentation aspects of this. So let me say too that the fold-out indicates the art director Sarah Habibi, Eric Skillman, designers Nissim Hickson, Danny Rutledge. And so I like this style. I like these shots. This has a sense of the intimate portrait nature of the film itself, and there's a sort of color scheme that's accompanying it, the blues and the sort of earth tones. And I like the opening of the disc, and I open it here. There is the landscape shot here, and there's also the picture that's accompanying the actual disc itself. I mentioned the importance of the landscape of the face, and we get that right here as well. So that is a great design choice. I'm very taken with this. I'm sorry, I should have mentioned that on this side of the plastic casing, of course, would be the place where the actual fold-out is housed. So I've just taken the liberty of removing it for purposes of discussion of this title on this video. And it is a fold-out. I'm not a fan of the fold-out. I really hoped that many more Criterion releases could have the stable booklet fashion, but that's a minor criticism. But I do want to emphasize that the essay by Zakes Mda called "Staying Power," this is really great. This provides yet further context, something that that I wasn't quite appreciative of until I read the essay with more attention. Was, well, among other things, sort of the socio-political context of, say, Lesotho and South Africa being, I think, an important key element of the plot. And that understanding, I think, makes the film even more vivid in terms of the detail and the obstructions or hindrances that confront our main characters. And so that detail emerges, or those discussions emerge among the many discussion points in this great essay. And other discussion points are the thematic stylings of the concerns of the film, the characterization, the importance of this film, reflection of the film in the context of say, stories from Africa or African cinema, while also showing a sort of a placement of Mosese as a filmmaker in this context of 2020. So for these and other reasons, this essay, Staying Power, this is one of the best. So once again, please do not, my strong suggestion is to not read the essay until you have seen the film. And so after you've seen the film, please check out this great essay. It's called Staying Power. And I think that rounds out my points that I wanted to discuss with regard to this release from Criterion this year. This is not a burial, it's a resurrection. It is a fine release. It was my first time watching it, as I mentioned before, and I'll say it again. It was my first time watching it. I loved this. I really loved this. It was eye-opening. It was challenging. It was beautiful. It was heartbreaking. It was uplifting. It was devastating. It was emotionally powerful and brilliant all at once. And I watched it, and I watched it again, and I watched it again, and I think I will continue to do so thanks to this great release from Criterion of this film, which is This Is Not a Burial, It's a Resurrection. Okay, my dear friends, so that's it for now. And so until we meet again, please be happy and healthy and well. And please keep on watching a lot of great, great, great movies. So until the next video, my dear friends, stay strong, stay safe, and cheers.